help.
Good morning.
Good
morning.
No.
Excuse me, sir. One minute. Don't go back to mom. I need to help. Okay, now we can do it. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
We're here to celebrate the life of Pete Goodwin. Pete would be very angry with us if we didn't laugh today. This is a day to remember him. Yes, there's no right there. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is turn your phones off, okay? Because I hate to be interrupted when I'm giving a speech. And so does Charlotte. But we welcome you. We're going to have a wonderful time today. We're going to cry, we're going to laugh, and we're going to remember the man Pete Goodwin and learn more about why he was such a good man. With that said, I'd like to welcome Reverend Addae to say a few words. Thanks, Charlotte.
In this hour of holy stillness, we gather to honor the life and the person we love. We remind ourselves that the flames of life and love are never fully extinguished. In this hour of holy stillness, we offer ourselves for sharing the weight of each other's grief. We offer the strength of our love to help others survive their pain and grief. In this hour of holy stillness, we call forth from each of us the power we offer out of life, out of loss, and out of love. Claimed by death, we remember Pete Goodwin's life. Blessings for a life well lived, blessings for his peaceful departure, blessings for his shared friendships, blessings for his humor and wisdom, blessings for his faithful service in this community, blessings for his curiosity and zest for life, blessings for his love of family, blessings for the known and the mystery, blessings on Pete Goodwin's ashes. Amen.
When people die, they don't just disappear. There's no switch. There's no such a thing as out of sight, out of mind. There's no switch to flip to turn off our feelings, but we are at a loss for words, for normalcy and for what was and what could have been. Sorry. That's the thing about people who are loved. They're never far away. They come to us in a song lyric, or in a line of a movie dialogue, or on a long walk, and we'll remember and laugh a little in memoriam.
Unlike many of you here, I did not have the privilege of a long friendship, a relationship with Pete, but the person that I did know for the short time that we were together, I think these words of George Bernard Shaw, the true joy in life, are very fitting of the person that I got to know. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community. And as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle for me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations.
Before I talk about Pete, I want to give you a testimony to Pete in the form of some of the folks we have here. Ray traveled from Seattle to be here today. Jerry traveled from Olympia, Washington to be here today. Gail traveled from, do you live in New Mexico still? You know, I don't think anybody walked across the street for my funeral. I can't tell you that that's a small example of how Pete touched lives and what a difference he made. I also want to introduce you to his family. There's a price of admission today. Normally these things are free, but today we're charging all of you something. You must go tell their family. Susan, Robwan, stand up so they all see you. Abudi, Sarah, please tell these people how much Pete meant to you today. Or as Pete would like to say, tell them how bad he pissed you off. Either one will work, all right, to talk to these folks. And thank you. They're here today from Oak Oklahoma, and other countries. You know, when I think of Pete's death, when I remember Pete now, two words immediately come to mind. The first is gratitude. The immense gratitude I have that Pete was in my life for 44 years. The second is anger. The son of a bitch is supposed to be delivering my eulogy. And that's the way we planned it, actually, for many, many years. And I was helping him write it. And because I couldn't trust him. I miss Pete Goodwin. I met Pete Goodwin the week of September 2nd, 1974. We were both new recruits to Arthur Anderson. There were about 50 or so recently graduated accountants in the room. Most of them were 22 years old and had kind of what you'd call a normal life, and their tails wagged real hard. They were looking forward to their careers, looking forward to work. Pete and I took different routes. Pete went to Vietnam and then came back. He was a draftee. He served honorably as a medic. And I was fighting other wars that slowed me down a bit. So I think I was 26 or 7 and Pete was 24 or 5. But we were like 20 years older than anyone else in the room. And so somehow we gravitated each other. And you've all heard of love at first sight. Pete and I was love at first conversation. Because he was totally unattractive and not my type. And thus it went for 44 years. And many of the people in this room have witnessed me and Pete together. It was who could insult who faster and funnier. And Pete always won, which is another reason I'm angry at him. I never got to have the last word. But you know, that first conversation, that first memory of that first conversation tells me what Pete started teaching me, because anyone who's been around Pete knows that regardless of what you called him, he was a teacher. And I can't begin to tell you all he taught me. But Pete gave me my first lesson in what real love is. And that sounds a little strange. But love is when you recognize the spark that animates the human being that you're looking at is the same spark that animates yourself. When you see that we're all just carrying these one sparks of a greater light. And when you see it in another individual, you see yourself and you see the greatness of what love is, and you start loving in a different way than you've ever loved before. Pete taught me agape. He taught me what love really means. And that's the most important lesson I've learned. I'm still not very good at it, but I'm still trying to listen to Pete and get better at it. And over the years, we did many, many things together. We shared many business experiences, many life experiences. As my family says when they refer to Pete, there's two expressions they use. Number one, Uncle Pete. But number two, yes, that's Dad's heterosexual male life partner. And it's true, I confess. And Pete taught me about music because Pete knew about music. Pete taught me about camping and bird watching because he knew about it and I didn't. Pete continued every moment I spent with Pete, he taught me something. And he taught all of you something if you were paying attention. He was an intellect, he was an intellectual, he was a loving man, he was a teacher, and he was also a serial dilettante. He knew a lot about stuff. It took him about a month or two to learn it, and then he went on to something else. And therefore, he was a cornucopia of useless information, which I did my best to remind him of as often as I could. Pete was my source of humility. Those that know me know that comes hard for me. Pete beat me up like no other human being could beat me up. And I loved every minute of it. And I know, most of you know Pete of the last 15 years, but there were 30 years or so before that. At Arthur Anderson, he quickly learned, as I did, that I didn't like accounting very much. We both chose the careers for really the wrong reasons. He was a GI that needed to make some money. I had child support to pay, so I had to have a job. So that's why I studied accounting, because they got paid, and so did Pete. And after about 6 months, we both knew it was a terrible decision. And so Pete was really a scientist, a teacher, a wise man. And he spent the rest of his life trying to find a box that he could fit in, because he didn't fit in boxes. He left Arthur Anderson. He was very tempted to take a job with Ringling Brothers Circus. Really, he interviewed for a job as a controller with them, and he had to actually, as part of the interview process, get on a train and travel with the circus for a month. He came back and said, the stupidest decision I ever made in my life was not taking that job. But he was attached to having an apartment, his own little nest, and the thought of living in a train full-time didn't appeal to him. He became the assistant controller of the United Way of America. He had a great future there. He could have risen up in that organization quite easily. But that is there that he just went to the mirror and said, there's no way I can do this. I am not an accountant. And he quit. And he had a series of other jobs. He rose to be president of a software company in Washington, D.C., Sterling Software. He was an eminently capable man, and he could have led any organization. But he didn't like it so much, and it intersected with a health issue. He fell off a bicycle, hit his head, and spent 2 or 3 years not being able to stand up straight. And because of it completely disrupted his sense of balance. And that kind of took him out of what we would call a normal career path. He found jobs as consulting, a smart guy who knows a little bit, can always sell something to somebody, and he did that for a number of years. And then he was married during that period. In fact, my ex-wife introduced him to his ex-wife. There's always seems to be a common theme in my life with Pete, you know. But Jackie and Pete remain dear friends, and we've been in contact with Jackie, and she wishes she could be here today. After this period, and after short careers in accounting, and then a short career as a president, and then he met another figure who I didn't acknowledge today, or did I? Gail Rubin came from New Mexico to be here with us. And they became friends, and they decided to go off on an adventure. They called me up and said, hey, we're going to move to New Mexico. I said, well, did you get a job? No. Well, why are you moving? Because I like New Mexico. Okay. And so they went off to New Mexico as friends, and he lived there for a period of time, and we visited him, and he was not really, quite frankly, it was probably the happiest period of his life. And I'm not attributing that to Gail, although she's a very great credit. I'm attributing it to the fact he loved the desert. He loved the mountains. And he became, as Pete does, you know, an amateur botanist. And he could tell you all about the plants and geologist. He could tell you everything you needed to know about the mountains around New Mexico. And he made many good friends out there, too. But he had trouble paying the rent because it was hard to find work, and he called me up and he came to see us for a while. He worked with me at the company. And then his parents got sick, and he moved to Westford, Oklahoma, and helped them for a number of years before returning to work with me at another company in Dallas. During all this period, I could just sort of rattle off without giving you all the details. Pete he learned to cook and was actually a chef for a number of people, delivering meals to a judge, was it, Susan? And a couple other clients in Weatherford. He decided, he moved down, it's hard for me to keep up with the sequence of events with Pete, because he's an integral part of everything that ever happened to me. So it's hard to parse out when things happen. But he came to Dallas for a while, and he got involved, he got interested in model railroad building. And he actually built 3 or 4 yard-scale garden railroads that were purchased by 2 NFL players. And then somehow through that, he got involved with a partner, and they made a scale model of New York City that hangs today at the ceiling of the Hard Rock Cafe in Madrid. Why or how he did that, I'll never be able to explain, but he did. And it's like that with Pete, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And whatever the next thing was, he became a master of it. He had a period of where he was an astrologer. Not astrologer, astronomer. He probably would have been better off if he was an astrologer, but he was an astronomer. And he had telescopes. They gave star parties for adults and children and could explain to you the universe in a half hour. He was like that about everything. And it never stopped up to the end. And that's why he displayed such encyclopedic knowledge of so many topics. Now, his reasoning skills were limited. Pete would be disappointed in me if I hadn't said that. He was my hero, my brother from another mother, my alter ego, my priest, my confessor. When most folks in the room know I had a health problem. I had fought cancer. When Melinda called, I don't think I could do it. Melinda called and told Pete that I was about to have major surgery. And I'd probably been down for a while, and I might even die. After laughing, Pete said, I'm coming down. Because Melinda was working. She was working for an architectural firm at the time. And Pete Goodwin nursed me back to health. Pete Goodwin cooked for me. Pete Goodwin changed my J-tube. Melinda did too. I'm not trying to take credit away from her, but she knows how much Pete helped and how much he did during that period. What she says, now I've got to take care of both of you. So there's always a little bit of that involved with Pete. So I can only say this. He taught me love in a way that's a better way to love. He educated me. I was a hick from Southeast Texas. He taught me about music and about art and about any subject you can name. So I miss Pete Goodwin, and I'll always miss him. And I'll never not have the sense of gratitude I have from having known him. And I'll never stop being pissed off at him. Thank you.
I'm Abudi Al-Jalal, Pete's nephew. It had been a long time. I remember the first time that we came. Can you hear me? Yeah. I remember the first time my brother and I came to visit Uncle Pete here in Braunfels. It had been a long time since we had seen him in Oklahoma. And so he remembered us as little kids. And I can only imagine that he was explaining to all his friends that his little nephews were coming to visit. So we get here, and out come these two fully grown Arab bearded men. I'm sure everybody thought Uncle Pete was crazy, which he kind of was. But Uncle Pete was a great uncle. I remember as a young boy, in the backyard, he set up one of his telescopes, and he told me to take a look, see what you could see. And I saw the rings of Saturn just clear as day. I remember feeling just so inspired. And that's what Uncle Pete was really great at. He did that with so many different things. I'm really grateful for three people in particular who helped my uncle a lot. John, of course, and Melinda. You guys were amazing friends to Uncle Pete. And of course, Lucy, his wife. I know you brought him a lot of peace, and I appreciate that. Well, that's all I've got. You'll be best, Uncle Pete. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Terry Jackson, and I'm really honored to be able to speak about Pete today. Pete was my friend, my confidant. He was my co-worker, my fellow Unitarian Universalist, and fellow board member. Pete was a friend to my children, and he acted as our family's minister. He officiated at my wedding, at my brother's wedding, and at my dad's memorial service. Even though I repeatedly joked with him about being a fake reverend, he just kept showing up for us. And we trusted him. So I hope we're still married, though. He was a true and a dear friend. I still vividly remember the first time I met Pete. I had a business meeting set with his employer, Carolyn Casey, over at Homestead Senior Care. She took me to her back office to meet with her new business development person. Pete and I only spoke for about 5 minutes, but as I was leaving the office, I turned to Carolyn and said, "Where in the world did you find him?" Pete's sophistication and worldliness far surpassed my typical daily interactions here in New Braunfels. We connected immediately. I watched Pete quickly assimilate into our town and become a gift to so many. He helped grow our membership for the Central Texas Advocates for Seniors, our CTOS group. In addition to being a board member year after year, he served as the legislative committee chair. He comprised the entire legislative committee because, quite frankly, none of the rest of us wanted to do it. He read extensively on legislative issues that were affecting the seniors we served. He digested and then presented complex legal concepts to the rest of us so we could understand them. Pete is the only human being I know who read the entire Affordable Care Act. Every single page. In fact, he may be the only human being who's actually read the entire Affordable Care Act. Pete was brilliant and unassuming and kind and complex. He shared with my husband and me stories of his childhood, growing up with a scientist for a father and an artist for a mother. That always seemed to me to be the epitome of balance. I found out only by accident that Pete was a Unitarian Universalist. I texted him to say I couldn't make a meeting because I was going to visit my dad in the hospital and felt I needed to be there. Pete texted back and said he'd offered to say a prayer for me, but he's Unitarian Universalist and he wasn't sure that would count. So voila, I found one more connection with Pete. It's extremely unusual in this part of the country to meet someone who was raised from birth as a Unitarian Universalist. Many of us found our way to the UU Church due to disillusionment with other religions. Pete, however, had it instilled into the fabric of his being that we should have justice, equity, and compassion in our relationships. That there is inherent worth and dignity in every human being. That we must each pursue our own responsible search for truth and meaning. With no official dogma presented to him, Pete was encouraged to construct his own personal vision of how to approach the world and his fellow humans. Early on in our relationship, Pete was living in a small rental home here in town and was actively giving away his possessions. He explained that he had more than he needed, and although he treasured some of his items, it was incredibly freeing to him to let go of things. It seems to me Pete was at his very best when he was giving to others. His true essence shone forward when he could help others. I watched him befriend folks who were relatively hard to befriend, who were a bit tough to listen to and challenging to make space for. But Pete did it. He found a way to connect and to be a friend. Now, I also observed him in vastly different environments. Prior to meeting Lucy, Pete was often the only male at Thursday happy hours with a regular group of beautiful female healthcare marketers. If you can picture an image of a stereotypical pharmaceutical sales rep, these were the kind of women that Pete was the only male with on Thursday happy hours. But rather than objectifying these women, or demonstrating any sort of misogyny. Pete got to know them for who they were. They trusted him. They opened up to him with their experiences of depression, loss, and personal traumas. He was as equally at home with these ladies as he was with the more difficult folks. Pete did not discriminate in whom he'd support or whom he'd listen to. When my daughter was only 17, she was involved in a horrible car accident that resulted in a fatality for the other driver. My heart was breaking for Kathleen. I didn't know how she'd be able to handle such a trauma at that age. Pete helped me and listened to me and let me cry. He said, "Terry, everyone has their Vietnam to go through. This is Kathleen's Vietnam, and she'll survive." He described how he was just about my daughter's age. He witnessed atrocities that no one could have been prepared for. But he somehow also survived. My daughter reminded me of a story Pete shared about an incident he had right when he'd come back from Vietnam. He said he'd only been home for a couple of weeks and gone into a record store. Since he was fresh out of the military, he was sporting his unmistakable crew cut and wearing a military-issued camo jacket. Now, this was the 60s, and a long-haired store worker approached him and asked Pete if he'd been in Vietnam. He tensed, preparing for what could have been a difficult exchange. However, the record store clerk simply said, "Welcome back." 2 weeks, Pete said. "I've been home an entire 2 weeks and not a single person outside my family had welcomed me back." I've often wondered how extraordinarily difficult it must have been for Pete to be engaged in a conflict that he was so obviously opposed to. He told me he didn't think it was fair to avoid joining the military when so many others his age were being drafted. So he chose to be a medic, thinking it would be the most positive contribution he could give to a horrific war. He served, he came home, put a life together, and despite battling those demons throughout his life, he found a way to bring kindness, humor, and support to so many of us. Now, my daughter also reminded me of another Pete story, but it's way too inappropriate to share right here. So catch me after the service, and I'm sure Pete would appreciate me sharing stories about his sex ed training. Pete met Lucy at his 60th birthday party. The week after the party, I told him I'd thought of a woman I wanted him to meet, but he declined, saying he'd just met someone he was really interested in and didn't think he'd need me to be introducing him to any more women.
Amen.
He must have known right away. Pete loved Lucy, and he loved her son Shane. He laughed with Lucy, and thankfully, he brought Lucy's friendship to the rest of us. Pete said his first wife had been his intellectual partner, and now Lucy was his social partner. She made him laugh. She made him have fun. And in our last evening together, Pete told me that marrying Lucy was the smartest thing he had ever done. And given what a brilliant man Pete was, this was the best compliment he could have given Lucy. Pete, my friend, I will be eternally grateful for the friendship you developed with me and my family, for the examples of acceptance, strength, and generosity that you demonstrated. But Pete, it feels like you just left us too damn soon. Our world needed more, not fewer men of your caliber. We will miss you for your wit, your kindness, and your biting intellect. We will miss you because you're absolutely irreplaceable. We will always love you, Pete Goodwin.
but I'm okay now. Goodbye, my friend. You can go now. Goodbye, my friend.
Thank you, Yesenia. That was beautiful. It's time for you folks to tell us a bit about Pete. I'd like to invite anyone who has something to say, as long as it's funny. Just joking. You can even cry. Cool. And I also like to thank you, Terry. It was beautiful. It really was. You gave the eulogy I wish I could have given. Thank you. Charlie, come on up and start this out. And if there's anyone else, we have microphones, and we'll bring them to you. You got it?
Is that on? Great. Now I want to say a few words, just real quick. I love Pete. He loved this room, and so many. Look at the size of this room, and the amount of people here, and the connections from all different parts of his life. I got to work with Pete. He was my boss for a time, and I met him about the same time. First moment I met him, he just sort of gave me a job interview, and he wasn't hiring, you know. And Pete was a mentor to me very much, a fellow dilettante, and he also, one thing I didn't hear is he had such a strange sense of the absurd. Like he could really, he and I ran an Alzheimer's facility together, and it's an absurd place. And Pete had a way of just sort of taking it all in, like an army medic, and saying, keep moving, you're just walking wounded, you know, just keep, you know, like, he just had a way of observing, laughing, and kind of moving on, and sharing that, and he and I shared that together. So I get to read a poem called Sing Well. Excuse me, I'm getting old. Sing Well by Joyce Grenfell. If I should die before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone, nor when I'm gone speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known, you walking wounded. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well. I'll miss you, Pete. Would anyone else like to come up?
Sarah, would you like to say something?
No, I need my notes for the closing.
Oh, well, okay. Kate, come say something about Uncle Pete.
I never pass an opportunity to say something. Terry, your words were very beautifully put, and I was late because my mother's in a facility far away from here, and Pete helped me get her there. And I believe my mother's alive today because of Pete's help. And I'm able to process what is coming with this whole thing. I lost my father-in-law on Tuesday, and Pete helped me with him too. He was the most selfless person I've ever known in my life. He was the most encouraging human being I've ever had the pleasure to be loved by. Completely 100% accepted by, understood by. Dang on it, I'm one of those difficult people she mentioned. I mean, I'm sure that you would all agree that I'm probably on the top of the list. And I never felt like a burden to him. Today, I got the news. I never felt so selfish and small. I never felt so pitifully selfish and small because I thought he was okay. He opened this door for this meeting to come here for what, Brian, 8 years? He helped with the key holder of a fellowship that keeps people alive every Tuesday. And for a minute I thought we could have helped him, but you know what? He did everything he wanted to do. He did it exactly. You know that song, My Way? He wrote that song with his life. And every single thing that you said, every person in this room had a piece of Pete, and he's still alive. And when he had me work at All's Care, he was preparing me. He kept me out of jail about 80 times. He did. I tell you, I would have thrown away my freedom if I didn't have Pete's number. So many times when some awful things were happening to my mom, I was ready to go. I grabbed the police officer's collar in my mother's room one day, and I walked down the hall and called Pete. You know, God, I can't even look at him. I feel like I wasn't even worthy of the kind of love that man gave me. But he always let me know I was. You're so blessed to have known him so long. I just aspired someday to be as selfless as Pete. Thank you.
Yes, I was blessed to know Pete. Yes, I was blessed to know Pete. I wouldn't admit it to him. I told him I was cursed. I'll close the comments with what I wanted to say in my closing comment. Lucy, thank you. Thank you. Pete, for many of the years in New Braunfels, was a bit adrift. And he found focus through the community and through his church, and that's why he served it so well. He didn't have anything else to do. He was tired and prayed. And when he met Lucy, I saw a spark, the flame that kept burning. It's been 6 or 7 years. And I just want to say, Pete told me pretty much everything except that he was dying. And he loved you. And he was grateful for you, just as we are. So now we have a reading.
Hello. I think this is my first time to ever use a microphone. Hold on to the memories. Tell the stories that make you smile, the stories that make you laugh. Share the memories with people who knew Uncle Pete and people who didn't. May they remind you of the beauty of his life, of his passion and his connection to us. And may they bring you peace on this day.
I'd like to invite everyone to join us for refreshments and share conversation and stories of Pete. You know, I feel like this has been a short service in which to honor a great man. He was an undiscovered great man, except by you lucky few. It's a shame more of the world couldn't have understood and heard what Pete had to say. So thank you. Join us for the invitation.
I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join hands with your neighbors. Hands touch hands. These hands you hold now once held Pete's hands. Hand by hand we touch those who are here with us and those who are no longer with us. And hand over hand we touch all of humankind. Let our hands touching hands remind us that Pete is no longer with us, but he is in us. He touched us. He is in our memories. He is in our stories. He is in the way we move through the world. Let us go into the world and joyfully carry Pete with us in our hearts. May it be so.
If you would all repeat to move chairs so that we can get the booths together. So if you can find a place to gather and enjoy the conversation for a few minutes, we'll have the